The day Malik Thompson first crossed paths with Officer Randall Price began like any other late summer morning in Brookside Heights, a suburban neighborhood tucked between a stretch of old oak trees and a network of quiet roads that led toward the bigger city. The sun was barely rising, its early light brushing the rooftops with a faint gold that made the houses look warmer than they felt. Morning joggers moved along the sidewalks, dogs pulled impatiently on leashes, and sprinklers sputtered to life in carefully trimmed lawns. It was a place that prided itself on order, a place where people liked things predictable. Malik, at 12 years old, had become used to being the unpredictable element without ever trying to be. He wasn't loud or troublesome. He was observant in a way that made adults pause, and quiet in a way that made kids underestimate him. Tall for his age, with deep brown skin and a head full of tight curls, he often pulled his hoodie up when he walked to the community center at the edge of the neighborhood. His father had taught him to move with awareness, to pay attention to corners and shadows, to avoid walking with his hands in his pockets when passing patrol cars. Not because he was doing anything wrong, but because the world had a way of misreading boys who looked like him. He carried his basketball under his arm, tapping it lightly with his fingertips as he walked. The ball's rhythm kept him calm, especially today. His father, Staff Sergeant Anthony Thompson, hadn't come home last night. Malik knew what that meant. When his father disappeared for a day or two, he was on assignment. Not the usual National Guard drill weekends that neighbors understood, but the kind of missions Anthony never discussed in detail. He just called them trips. Malik knew better. He wasn't supposed to know, but kids noticed things. Kids heard pieces of phone calls, saw duffel bags packed in silence, watched a father's posture shift from relaxed to guarded in the space of a breath. Malik knew his dad was part of something demanding, something dangerous. He also knew better than to talk about it. That morning, the sky was a soft blue, still stretched thin before the heat of the day. Malik reached the crosswalk near the community center, waiting for the signal to change. Cars hummed past. A police cruiser sat in the parking lot across the street, angled just enough toward the entrance to suggest someone was watching. He spotted Officer Price behind the wheel, sipping his coffee and glancing around the lot in slow sweeps. Malik had seen him around before. The officer had a reputation, stern, easily irritated, and convinced he could read people at a glance. Malik kept his eyes on the crosswalk sign, telling himself to stay focused on his morning practice. He had a tournament coming up, and his dad had promised they would train together once he returned. The thought steadied him, a reminder of the bond that shaped much of his world. Anthony Thompson had raised him with discipline, but also with a softness that rarely left his voice. Malik always felt protected in ways he didn't fully understand. When the signal changed, Malik jogged across, the ball bouncing beside him. He slipped through the front doors of the community center. The gym inside buzzed with its usual morning noise, sneakers squeaking on polished wood, whistles from a coach running drills, the occasional thud of a ball hitting a rim. Malik breathed it in like familiarity itself. He placed his things on the bleachers and warmed up alone. He didn't like joining the older kids until his muscles were ready, until he felt fully settled. His mind wandered. He thought about the way his father moved. Precise, calm, controlled. He had once asked him why he always scanned the room the moment he walked in. Anthony had smiled quietly and told him that some habits were hard to break. Malik mimicked those habits now, though not as obviously. As the morning continued, the gym grew busier. People came and went through the lobby, and at some point, The atmosphere shifted. A murmur spread across the room like wind picking up after a long stillness. Malik dribbled to a stop and glanced toward the doors. Officer Price had entered the building. His presence filled the room with a kind of tension that others seemed to recognize instantly. He stood tall, his uniform perfectly pressed, his boots polished. His hand rested on his belt, not in threat, but in habit. His eyes swept over the space, momentarily landing on the groups of kids playing, the parents stretching in the corner, and the front desk attendant who straightened up at his approach. Malik returned to his drills, hoping Price would ignore him. But hope wasn't something he trusted. Not when people like Officer Price were involved. The officer walked through the room with a slow, evaluating pace. Something about his step suggested he was looking for an excuse to engage with someone. Malik kept his eyes on the court, breathing evenly. He didn't bounce the ball too loudly, didn't move too sharply, didn't draw attention. But then, a stray pass from another kid soared across the court and hit the wall near where Price was standing. The noise made the officer turn sharply, and his gaze landed directly on Malik, though Malik hadn't been the one who threw it. Their eyes met. Price's expression told Malik everything he needed to know. Accidental or not, the ball had rolled too close to the wrong person. The officer picked it up. He walked toward Malik, each step deliberate. Malik swallowed, bracing himself. "This yours?" Price asked, holding out the ball. "No," Malik said carefully. "It came from the other court." Price tilted his head. "You sure?" "Yes, sir." There was a weight in the air now, subtle but unmistakable. A few adults stopped stretching. A couple of kids paused their dribbling. Malik stood still, remembering what his father had always told him. Stay respectful. Stay calm. Price narrowed his eyes, studying him as if he were trying to solve a puzzle that shouldn't be complicated. "You new around here?" "No, sir." "Who's your guardian?" "My dad." "And he's where?" "He's working." Malik hesitated, then added, "He's military." Price let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Is that right?" "Yes, sir." "And what does he do?" The officer pressed, skepticism growing. "Maintenance? Logistics?" Malik's hands tightened at his sides. He didn't want to answer. His father had always been clear about keeping details close. But Price stared at him, expecting something, amusement forming in the corner of his mouth. "He's in Special Forces," Malik said quietly. A few nearby kids turned to look. The coach, hearing the shift in tone, glanced over from the far side of the gym. Price's laugh grew louder. "Special Forces?" he repeated. "Son, do you know how many dads I've heard kids brag about like that? Everyone's dad is a hero until someone asks for proof." Malik didn't respond. His cheeks warmed. He felt something pinch inside, not anger, but something sharper, something that made his chest feel smaller. Price tossed the ball lightly between his hands, still smiling. "So tell me, what's your dad's rank?" Malik hesitated too long. Price chuckled again. "Thought so." The officer dropped the ball at Malik's feet and stepped closer. Not enough to touch, but enough to tower. "Next time you talk to an officer," he said, his voice cooling, "don't make up stories. It doesn't look good." Malik lowered his eyes, wishing he could melt into the floor. He wasn't lying, but he also had no way to prove anything. His throat tightened. He could feel the weight of watching eyes, hear the quiet shift of feet on hardwood as people pretended not to watch. Price turned as if finished, but something made him glance back at Malik. "What's your dad's name?" "Anthony Thompson." Price paused. The name meant nothing to him. He nodded slowly. "Well, you tell Anthony Thompson that if he's really what you claim he is, I'd be happy to verify it. But something tells me I won't find much." Malik said nothing. The officer walked off, heading toward the lobby. Malik stood frozen, the ball untouched at his feet. His chest felt tight, his mind racing. He wasn't embarrassed because someone doubted him. He was embarrassed because he had spoken his father's truth and been treated like a child telling tall tales. A hand touched his shoulder. It was Coach Rivera, a solid man with a calm presence. "You okay, Malik?" "Yes, sir." "You didn't do anything wrong." Malik nodded without looking up. "Want to sit a minute?" the coach asked. "No, sir. I'm fine." He wasn't fine, but he wanted to be. He picked up his ball and returned to shooting. Each movement felt stiffer, each breath heavier. The sound of the net provided a small comfort. He focused on form, on angles, on the small details that made the shot repeatable. That's what his dad taught him. Focus on what you can control. Don't let someone else decide who you are. Still, the moment replayed in his mind. Price's laughter, the disbelief, the doubt. Across the gym, the door to the lobby opened again. Someone stepped in. Conversation in the room softened, just a little, like people turning instinctively toward a change in the air. Malik didn't notice at first. He kept practicing, lost in repetition, grounding himself in the one place where he felt steady. It wasn't until he heard a familiar voice say his name that he looked up. His father stood in the doorway. Anthony Thompson's presence never needed announcement. He moved quietly, but there was something about the way he carried himself, controlled, poised, that drew attention anyway. He wore plain clothes, jeans, and a fitted shirt, but even without a uniform, something about him signaled authority. Malik's heart lifted in a rush of relief so strong it nearly made his knees weak. His father was home. Early. Unexpectedly. Anthony gave him a small nod, the kind that said he understood more than he needed to ask. Malik swallowed hard, his voice barely steady. "Dad?" I will now write the full conflict section of the story, between 4,000 and 5,000 words. The story will pick up exactly where the exposition ended, with Anthony standing in the doorway of the gym. The tone, pacing, and style will remain consistent, and the content will gradually build toward the rising action, without concluding the story. The moment Malik saw his father, something inside him steadied, as if the air around him shifted just enough for him to breathe without thinking about it. His father stepped farther inside the gym, his eyes sweeping the space almost imperceptibly. It was the kind of glance that seemed casual to anyone else but made Malik recognize the signs of someone who was always aware of their surroundings. Anthony walked with an easy stride, not hurried, not tense, but there was a kind of precision to the way he moved, like every step had been measured. Malik knew his father didn't do it on purpose. It was simply who he was after years of training and deployments. People noticed without knowing why. The coach stood up straighter as Anthony approached. A few teenagers lowered their voices. Even the front desk attendant peeked through the window of the office door. Malik jogged toward him, gripping the basketball as if it could anchor his emotions. When he reached his father, he stopped just shy of him and hesitated. He wanted to hug him, but there were eyes everywhere. His father solved that problem for him. He placed a steady hand on Malik's shoulder, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "You all right, son?" Anthony asked, his voice low. Malik nodded, though the truth still sat heavy in his chest. His father studied him for another moment before shifting his attention toward the rest of the gym. Anthony didn't miss much. He noticed things quickly: the subtle tension lingering near the lobby, the two boys whispering near the bleachers while glancing at Malik, the front desk attendant watching with curiosity and something like concern, and the faint hum of unease clinging to the room as if the energy had shifted before he arrived. Then he saw Officer Randall Price. The officer was still in the lobby, speaking with the receptionist. His posture suggested he believed himself to be the center of something important, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted. Even from a distance, Anthony could read the situation. His instinct tightened like a quiet coil inside him. "Someone bothering you?" his father asked quietly. Malik hesitated. He didn't want to seem like he was complaining. He didn't want to make things bigger than they needed to be. But he also knew his father saw right through him. "There was a cop," Malik said softly. "He thought I was lying. About you." His father's eyes sharpened, but his expression stayed calm. "What did he say?" "He laughed," Malik murmured. "Said people make things up. He asked questions about you. He didn't believe me." Anthony nodded once. That alone carried a depth of meaning. Through the years, he had taught Malik that some things were not worth reacting to publicly, but some things required presence, not anger, strength without escalation. "Show me who he is," Anthony said. Malik pointed subtly toward the lobby. Anthony rested a steadying hand on his son's back and guided him forward. They walked toward the lobby together while conversations in the gym softened and curiosity trailed behind them like mist. As they approached, Officer Price turned slightly, catching sight of them. His expression held mild impatience, perhaps assuming this was another parent coming to complain or clarify whatever misunderstanding he imagined had occurred. "Officer," Anthony said calmly. Price looked him over, starting at the shoes, moving up the clothes, then meeting his eyes. Something flickered. A moment of assessing, maybe even a subtle disbelief that the tall, composed black man in front of him could be anything more than what his uniform suggested. "Can I help you?" Price asked. "I'm Anthony Thompson," he said. "This is my son. I understand there was a conversation earlier." Price crossed his arms, adopting an air of authority. "Just correcting a story. Kids tend to exaggerate. He said you were special forces. Thought I'd make sure he understands it's not okay to make claims like that." Anthony didn't flinch. "Did he tell you he was lying?" "No," Price admitted with a small shrug. "But it was easy to see. Kids his age pick things up from movies or TV, nothing harmful. Just needed to remind him not to misrepresent the truth." Anthony paused, letting silence fill the space for a beat. Malik felt his stomach twist. He didn't know what his father would say. He didn't know if he would declare everything openly or hold the details close as he usually did. "My son doesn't lie about my work," Anthony said. Price raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying you are?" "Yes," Anthony said simply. Price blinked, thrown off by the directness. "With which division?" "That's not something I discuss," Anthony replied. The officer laughed softly, shaking his head. "Sir, if you're claiming to be something, you need to confirm it, especially when your kid is telling people big stories." Anthony held his gaze with calm clarity. And who exactly do I need to confirm it for? Price's face stiffened. For me. I'm an officer of the law. Anthony leaned slightly forward, not in threat, but in a stance that carried quiet authority. My work is not under your jurisdiction, and my son doesn't need to justify his family to you. The receptionist behind the desk lowered her eyes, unsure whether to continue pretending she wasn't listening. Malik stood close to his father, unsure how far this would go. He could feel a low pulse of tension in the air, something spreading outward into the room. Price's arm flexed where his hand rested on his belt. Sir, if you're telling the truth, you can simply provide some form of proof. Anthony remained still, balanced. If you need verification for anything involving my son's safety, I will speak to your supervisor. But otherwise, you're overstepping. Price's jaw tightened. I'm doing my job. Your job, Anthony said evenly, doesn't involve interrogating a child alone. A quiet murmur rippled through the lobby. A couple of parents stepped out of the gym to see what was happening. Some recognized Anthony from community meetings. Others simply sensed that something important had shifted. Price's voice rose. If you're making claims, I have a right to verify them. That's how this works. No, Anthony corrected calmly. That is not how this works. The tension between them grew heavier. Malik felt caught between fear and admiration. He had never seen his father speak like this to an officer. Calm, controlled, but firm in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Yet something in Price's posture changed. Pride, frustration, or something deeper seemed to coil inside him. Sir, if you refuse to verify, I'll have to assume your son was misrepresenting you and treat the situation accordingly. Anthony's eyes sharpened. Treat it how? Price exhaled through his nose as if irritated by being challenged. I could file a report. A report about what? Anthony asked. Price hesitated, then said, about disruptive behavior. The room fell into a hush. Malik froze. Disruptive behavior. The phrase felt cold, like something taken out of a handbook and placed onto people who didn't fit the image of who belonged. Anthony stepped slightly in front of Malik. He was practicing basketball, he said. What's disruptive about that? His attitude, Price said. The way he talked to me. Malik's breath caught. I didn't. Anthony held up a hand gently, signaling him not to speak. Officer Price, Anthony said, with a steadiness that felt like the earth under Malik's feet. My son was respectful. You made assumptions about him and dismissed what he told you. That's the issue here, not his behavior. Price's face reddened slightly. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. You're right, Anthony said, but I can tell you when you've crossed a line. There it was, a shift in authority, subtle but undeniable. Price stiffened. For a second, it looked as if he didn't know how to respond. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked around the room as if searching for support. But the lobby had grown silent. People watched him, watched Anthony, watched Malik. The energy was thick with expectation. And then something unexpected happened. A second officer entered through the main doors. Officer Wright, a younger man with a steadier demeanor. He walked in mid-conversation with a senior administrator from the community center, but the moment he saw the standoff, he paused. Everything all right? Wright asked. Price straightened immediately. Just dealing with a situation. This man claims to be special forces, but he won't verify it. His kid was... Wright's expression changed subtly when he saw Anthony. Recognition, a flash of caution. "Sir," Wright asked Anthony respectfully, "is there an issue here?" Price looked between them, confused. "You know him?" Wright didn't answer directly. "I've seen his name before." Anthony nodded once. "Your colleague questioned my son unnecessarily." Wright turned to Malik, then back to Anthony. "Understood. I'll take it from here." Price bristled. "Take what?" "I'm handling it." "Price," Wright said quietly but firmly, "step aside." The older officer's jaw clenched, but he obeyed, though his glare at Anthony carried something sharper now, frustration mixed with something else, something unresolved. Anthony placed his hand gently on Malik's back again. "Let's step outside," he murmured. Malik nodded quickly. As they walked out of the lobby, the air in the gym began to return to normal, though the whispers would continue long after. Outside, the morning had grown warmer. Cars passed along the main road, and the distant sounds of children playing in the park drifted across the neighborhood. Anthony walked with Malik to a quiet bench near the entrance. They sat down, and Malik let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Did I do something wrong?" Malik asked softly. His father shook his head. "No, you didn't." He paused. "But you learned something today." Malik swallowed. "That people won't believe me?" "That some people see only what they want to," Anthony replied. "And when they do, it's not on you to fix their vision." Malik looked down at his hands. He looked at me like I was making things up. "I know," Anthony said gently, "and that's why I came." They sat quietly for a moment. Then Anthony added, "But this isn't over." Malik turned to him, confusion and worry stirring inside him. "Dad?" "People like him don't back down after something like that," Anthony said. "Not easily. And if he feels challenged, he'll look for a way to prove himself right, or prove someone else wrong." Malik felt a chill flutter through his chest. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," Anthony replied calmly, "we stay alert." Malik nodded slowly, though a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. A moment later, Officer Wright stepped out of the center and approached them. Anthony stood. Wright kept a respectful distance. "Sir," Wright said quietly, "I wanted to apologize on behalf of the department for earlier. Price can be stubborn. He doesn't always read situations well." "I gathered," Anthony said. Wright shifted his weight. "I'm not asking for details, but I'm aware of your service. Enough to know the boy wasn't lying." Anthony nodded. "Thank you." Wright added, "If anything else happens, let me know directly." Anthony glanced at his son. "Let's hope nothing does." Wright left soon after. For a moment, it seemed like the worst had passed. But deep down, Malik could tell something had been set in motion. He could feel it the way a person feels a distant storm. Not close enough to see, but close enough to sense. His father seemed to sense it too. As they walked home together, Anthony kept scanning the neighborhood. Malik noticed it now more than ever. The shift in his father's attention, the way his footsteps slowed near certain intersections, the occasional glance over his shoulder. "Dad?" Malik asked. "Yes?" "Do you think that officer is going to cause trouble?" Anthony didn't answer right away. People react to embarrassment differently. Some reflect, some retaliate. Malik bit his lip. He seemed like he wanted to prove something. He does, Anthony said. And to him, we disrupted the way he thought the world should work. They reached their street, a quiet stretch lined with trees and modest houses. Their home sat near the end, a small, sturdy place with a porch Malik loved to sit on during summer evenings. Today, it didn't feel as comforting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of the cedar his father used to store his gear. Malik dropped his bag and sat on the couch silently. Anthony stood for a few long seconds before going to the window and looking outside. Malik watched him. "Dad, go wash up and eat something," his father said gently. "Then we'll talk. I will now write the full rising action section of the story, between 4,000 and 5,000 words. The story will pick up exactly where the conflict section ended, and the tone and pacing will gradually build toward the climax without ending the story." The house felt different after what happened at the community center, though nothing had physically changed. The same sunlight drifted through the curtains in soft strips. The same framed photos lined the hallway walls. Malik at age 7 holding up his first basketball trophy. Malik on his father's shoulders at a summer fair. A rare candid photo of Anthony smiling at something out of frame. Yet beneath all of that familiarity, something quiet lingered. It wasn't quite fear, not fully formed, but it was something that kept Malik unusually aware of his surroundings. After washing up, he sat at the table with a sandwich, but his appetite was thin. He glanced toward the living room where his father stood near the front window, staring outside in a way that wasn't just looking. Anthony's posture was steady but intent, the kind that Malik had only seen a handful of times, when storms rolled in, when unfamiliar cars lingered near the house, when the news talked about things his father said were signs of larger events. Malik took a small bite of his sandwich and asked, "Dad?" Anthony didn't turn. "I'm listening." "Why did Officer Wright say he recognized your name?" Anthony exhaled slowly. There are situations where certain names circulate in law enforcement systems, sometimes because of coordination, sometimes because of necessity. Malik frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," his father said gently, finally turning Owen from the window, "let's keep things simple. Some of the work I do requires collaboration with agencies. Occasionally, that information is shared internally in limited ways." "So he knew you weren't lying." Malik paused. "I mean, I wasn't lying." Anthony walked over and sat in the chair across from him. His expression softened in the way it always did when he wanted Malik to truly hear something. "You don't ever need to feel ashamed for telling the truth. Not today. Not any day. What happened earlier wasn't about you lying. It was about someone deciding who you were without knowing you." Malik nodded but didn't speak, tracing small lines on the table's surface with his fingertip. His father watched him quietly. "You handled yourself well," Anthony continued. "Better than most kids your age would have. And better than some adults, too." Malik couldn't help a faint, reluctant smile. "You would have handled it better." Anthony leaned back slightly. "I've had years to learn. You're learning right now." Malik looked down again. "Do you think he's going to come back?" "I don't know," Anthony admitted. "But I do know that today he felt challenged. Some people handle that by stepping back. Others, not so much." A brief silence settled between them. "For now," his father said, "we just stay aware. But we don't live in fear." Malik nodded. though the unease in his chest didn't fully leave. Later that afternoon, they went through their normal routine as best they could. Anthony checked the mailbox, sorted through bills, and placed a few envelopes on the kitchen counter. Malik tried practicing some drills in the backyard, bouncing the ball on the concrete slab behind the house, but his mind kept drifting back to the gym, back to the officer's laughter and the way the room had seemed to change around him. When the sun began to dip, Malik's father stepped outside. He examined the backyard, then approached him. "Your form's good," he said, "but your shoulders are tense. Relax them." Malik lifted the ball again, trying to ease the stiffness. "I keep thinking about earlier." Anthony nodded. "I know. That's why we practice. Not to forget, but to focus your energy." He positioned his hands lightly on Malik's shoulders. "Loosen up here. Breathe, then shoot." Malik followed the instructions. The ball arced smoothly through the fading light and landed cleanly in the hoop. His father gave a small approving nod. Again. They practiced until the sky bruised into twilight. When they finally went inside, Malik felt steadier. Training with his father always did that. It was like his mind locked into place, each movement teaching him how to be present despite what pulled at him. As they cleaned up and prepared dinner together, a quiet knock sounded on the door. Malik and Anthony exchanged a look. It was too early for neighbors, too late for mail, and too soft to be a delivery. Anthony motioned for Malik to stay back as he approached the door. He opened it just wide enough to see outside. A figure stood on the porch, somewhat familiar. It took Malik a moment to recognize him. It was Mr. Howard, an older man from 2 houses down, known for watering his lawn at precise intervals and tending to his rose bushes with near-surgical detail. "Evening, Anthony," Mr. Howard said with a polite but uneasy smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No interruption," Anthony replied calmly. "Everything all right?" Mr. Howard shifted his weight and lowered his voice. "I thought you should know. I saw a police cruiser round the block a couple of times this afternoon. Same one. Same officer. He slowed near your driveway twice. Didn't stay long, but..." Malik felt his stomach clench. "Thank you for telling me," Anthony said. "Just looking out," Mr. Howard said with a nod. "You and your boy are good folks. I didn't want something going on without you knowing." Anthony expressed his appreciation, and after the neighbor left, he closed the door quietly. He didn't speak for several seconds. "Dad?" Malik asked. Anthony exhaled through his nose. "I was hoping he'd let it go." "So he was watching the house?" "Circling," his father corrected. "To him, he's gathering information. To me, it's something else." "What do we do?" Malik whispered. Anthony considered the question with a seriousness that made Malik's chest tighten. "We proceed with caution. Tomorrow, you're staying close to me. No unnecessary trips anywhere alone." Malik nodded quickly. The next morning came with a heaviness, even though the sky was clear and bright. Anthony insisted on driving Malik to school, something he didn't normally do unless there was a special occasion or Malik needed to bring in a heavy project. Today, he said it was just better to keep things simple. As they drove through the neighborhood, Malik's eyes scanned every parked car more than usual. He recognized the shift in his own behavior. He had learned it from watching his father, but not because he expected to use it like this. When they reached the school, Anthony watched the parking lot for a few moments before speaking. "Remember what we said," he told Malik. "Stay aware of your surroundings. Stick with your group. And if anything feels off, you find a teacher immediately." "Yes, sir," Malik said. His father's eyes softened. "Go on. Have a normal day. Don't let this consume you." Malik nodded and stepped out of the car. But the day didn't feel normal. At lunch, he sat with his usual group of friends. They talked about basketball, weekend plans, and the upcoming community league tournament. Malik tried to join in, but every so often he felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickling, like being watched. He caught sight of a police cruiser parked near the far edge of the school's lot. He couldn't see who was inside. Maybe it wasn't even the same officer. But the sight alone scattered his focus. By the time school ended, Malik was tense. He hurried toward the pickup area. His father's car wasn't in the usual spot. Instead, there was a police cruiser. Officer Price stood beside it. Malik stopped walking. His heartbeat thumped hard enough to drown out the noise of other kids around him. Price saw him and smiled faintly. Not a kind smile. Anthony arrived only seconds later, pulling into the lot in a rush Malik recognized as deliberate control. He parked, stepped out, and walked toward his son with long, steady strides. Price turned toward him. "Afternoon, Mr. Thompson," the officer said casually. Anthony positioned himself slightly between Malik and the officer. "Why are you here?" "Routine patrol," Price replied, the tone too smooth to be sincere. "Near a school? During dismissal?" Anthony asked. "We rotate areas," Price said with a shrug. "And I thought I'd ensure everything was peaceful. You know, after yesterday." Anthony's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "If you have business with me, you can go through proper channels. Don't approach my son without cause." "I didn't approach him," Price said. "He approached me by walking in my direction." Malik clenched his fists. That wasn't true. "We're leaving," Anthony said. "If you have no lawful reason to detain us, step aside." For a moment, it looked like Price might argue. His fingers twitched near his belt. His shoulders squared. His mouth opened, then closed. He stepped back. "Have a good day," he said. Anthony didn't respond. He guided Malik to the car. Once they were inside and driving away, Malik whispered, "He was waiting for us." "I know," Anthony said, "and he wanted me to know it." "Is he allowed to do that?" "Allowed? Maybe. Should he? No." "Dad," Malik hesitated. "Why won't he leave us alone?" Anthony took a long breath. "Because he thinks he's proving something, and he believes if he pushes hard enough, he'll find something to justify the way he treated you." "But there's nothing." "Exactly," his father said, "and that frustrates him even more." When they reached home, Anthony went straight to the phone and made several calls, quiet, concise, and purposeful. Malik couldn't hear the full conversations, but he recognized the tone. His father was speaking to people he normally only mentioned indirectly. The next few days settled into a strange pattern. Price didn't show up at the school again, but Malik noticed more cruisers in the neighborhood than usual. Sometimes they drove by slowly, headlights off in the early morning. Sometimes they paused at the intersection near their house before continuing. Malik grew more anxious, though he tried not to show it. His father noticed anyway. They practiced basketball every evening, using the drills to channel the tension. Then, one evening, everything shifted. Malik and his father were returning home from the grocery store. As they turned onto their street, they saw flashing lights. Police cars lined the curb near their house. Anthony slowed the car. Stay calm, he told Malik softly. They pulled into their driveway. Officers stood near the front door, speaking in low voices. When they saw Anthony step out of the car, several of them turned. Among them was Price. He smiled again, that same thin, uncomfortable smile. Anthony walked forward, posture composed but alert. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Price stepped forward. "We received a report of suspicious activity involving your property. Thought we'd check it out." "Suspicious according to who?" Anthony asked. Price shrugged. "Anonymous tip." Anthony's eyes narrowed just slightly, enough for Malik to notice. "We knocked," Price continued, "but no answer." "We weren't home," Anthony pointed out. "That's why we waited." One of the other officers cleared his throat nervously, as if aware this situation had already gone further than it should. "What exactly was the tip?" Anthony asked. Price avoided the question. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Yes," Anthony replied immediately. Price's brow furrowed. "Yes, you mind, or yes, we can?" "Yes, I mind," Anthony said. "You don't have a warrant, and unless you can articulate a legitimate reason, you won't be searching my property." The other officers exchanged looks. This had clearly gone beyond protocol. "We're trying to do our job," Price said. "Your job doesn't include harassing my family," Anthony replied calmly. Price took a step closer. "People don't make anonymous tips for no reason." Anthony held his ground. "Sometimes they do, especially when encouraged." The implication hung heavily in the air. One of the officers finally stepped in. "Price, maybe we should—" Price cut him off with a sharp gesture. Malik watched, heart pounding. He could tell his father was trying to keep things under control, but something about the tension in Price's posture made him uneasy. The officer looked like someone who had built a narrative in his head and was desperate to make reality match it. Anthony kept his voice steady. "Unless you can state clearly what the tip said, or unless you can provide paperwork, this conversation is over." Price glared at him. "Why so defensive?" "Because you've been circling my home," Anthony said. "Because you confronted my son without cause. Because you're standing here on my property trying to create a problem. That's why." The other officers shifted uncomfortably. Price's lips tightened. "We're not done here." "You are for tonight," Anthony replied. Price stepped back, but his eyes locked onto Anthony's with a look that made Malik's stomach twist. It was a look that promised escalation. The officers eventually left, though some appeared reluctant. Once the last cruiser drove off, Malik exhaled shakily. "Dad, what's happening?" he whispered. Anthony placed a hand on his shoulder. "Someone is trying to push us into a corner, but we're not going to let that happen." "That officer is trying to prove he's right," Anthony said, "even if it means bending the rules." They went inside. Anthony checked the locks, checked the windows, then made more calls, longer this time, with a tone Malik had only heard once before, when they had to leave town temporarily for one of his father's assignments. Later that night, Malik couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for every sound outside. A car passing, a distant dog barking, the creaking of the house settling. Then he heard soft footsteps. He got out of bed and peered into the hallway. His father was awake, wearing plain clothes and checking the front and back doors again. Not frantically, methodically, as if preparing for possibilities. "Dad?" Malik whispered. Anthony turned. Sorry, didn't mean to wake you. Malik stepped closer. I'm scared. Anthony crouched to his level, placing both hands on Malik's arms. I know, but listen to me. You're not alone, and you're not in danger. But he won't stop, Malik said. What if he... Anthony's voice softened in a way that felt like an embrace. No matter what happens, I will protect you. That is the one thing in this world you never have to doubt. Malik nodded, though a tear slipped down anyway. Anthony wiped it gently and gave him a small smile. Come on, try to rest. I'll be right here. Malik returned to bed, finally drifting into uneasy sleep. The next morning, the air felt heavy, as if something was coiled tight and waiting. Anthony informed Malik that he would not be going to school that day. Until things settle, you stay with me, he said. They spent the morning running small errands, but Anthony chose routes extremely carefully, taking turns Malik didn't expect, switching directions twice and using parking lots to change lanes. You're checking if we're being followed, Malik realized. Yes, his father said. It's just precaution. But Malik could tell it was more than that. Around noon, they stopped by a small strip mall to pick up dry cleaning. Anthony parked near the front entrance. As they stepped out of the car, Malik noticed something in the reflection of the shop window. A police cruiser, pulling into the lot. Slowly. Getting closer, then stopping. Price stepped out. Malik's breath hitched. Anthony's entire stance shifted, not with fear, but with preparation. Price stood across the lot, hands on his belt, eyes locked on them. He wasn't hiding his intentions anymore. He began walking toward them. Malik swallowed, his pulse pounding. Dad, stay behind me, Anthony murmured. And do not move unless I tell you. I will now write the full climax section of the story, between 4,000 and 5,000 words. The story will pick up exactly where the rising action ended, with Officer Price approaching across the parking lot. The tone, pacing, and emotional stakes will heighten and build toward the falling action without concluding the story. The dry cleaner's parking lot was quiet, almost too quiet for midday. Heat rose from the pavement in faint rippling waves, and the hum of distant traffic seemed swallowed by something heavier in the air. Malik stayed behind his father, his breath thin and quick, watching Officer Price advance with the steady purpose of someone convinced he had finally cornered something he'd been chasing. Anthony didn't move backward. Instead, he shifted his stance just enough to position himself between Malik and the officer more firmly, one foot angled to brace, his shoulders relaxed but prepared. It wasn't a posture Malik had ever seen his father use outside of training exercises, and even then, it hadn't carried this kind of quiet intensity. Price stopped about 10 feet away, his hand drifting near his belt, not gripping anything, just hovering, as if reminding both himself and the world of the authority he believed he held. Out running errands? Price said, his tone casual but sharpened around the edges. Anthony's voice was calm. State your purpose, officer. Why are you following us? Price chuckled softly. Following. I'm patrolling. That's what police officers do. You might not be familiar with the routine, but it's fairly simple. Malik saw the slight flicker in his father's eyes. Not fear, but recognition of the officer's intent. You've been outside my house. You've shown up at my son's school. You've approached us without cause. If this is patrol, then it's the most selective patrol I've ever seen. Maybe you shouldn't assume everything is about you, Price replied. Anthony didn't engage with the bait. Then explain it. The officer smirked. We got more tips. Anthony's expression didn't change, but something in the air seemed to tighten around him. Another anonymous report? Let's just say people are concerned about what's happening around your home and your movements. Price spread his hands slightly, as if making an innocent point. I'm here to check things out. Ensure safety. Whose safety? Anthony asked. Price didn't answer. Malik felt something cold slide down his spine. The officer's eyes crinkled at the edges, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached warmth. It was the expression of someone who believed he had gained ground. Anthony stepped forward by half an inch, barely noticeable, but Malik saw it. You have no right to approach my child, and no justification to monitor us without reason. You're manufacturing suspicion. Price shrugged. Maybe I'm trying to understand what you're hiding. I'm hiding nothing, Anthony said quietly. That's not what it seems, Price responded. Anthony's voice remained level. Then state your probable cause. Price bristled at the phrasing. His hand moved fractionally closer to his taser, not touching it, but hovering in a way that made Malik's heart spike. Dad, Malik whispered. Anthony extended his arm slightly backward without turning, signaling Malik to stay behind him. The officer kept his eyes locked on Anthony. See, this is the attitude I'm talking about. You act like you're above answering questions, like you don't have to cooperate with law enforcement. I don't have to cooperate with harassment, Anthony replied. Price's jaw clenched. I'm doing my job. No, Anthony said softly. You're trying to justify a mistake you made. You're trying to make reality match your assumptions, and you're dragging a child into it. Price took a single step closer. It felt like the world shrank around them. Malik's pulse roared in his ears. Step back, Anthony said. Not loudly, not even forcefully, but with the kind of controlled certainty that made Malik freeze. Price didn't step back. His expression hardened. You need to provide ID, right now. Anthony's voice carried a quiet firmness that cut through the tension. No. I'm under no obligation to provide ID unless you can clearly articulate reasonable suspicion of a crime. You're obstructing? I'm standing in a parking lot, Anthony replied. The officer's face flushed red. You're making this difficult, Price snapped. You're escalating a situation with no basis, Anthony countered. Malik watched as the officer's eyes flicked around the lot. A few people were nearby. 2 customers loading dry cleaning into their car. A man walking out of a donut shop. A woman holding a toddler. They weren't close enough to intervene, but they were close enough to witness. Price seemed aware of them, but not deterred. Sir, Price said, though the word held none of its usual respect, if you continue refusing to cooperate, I have the right to detain you. Malik's breath caught. Anthony's eyes didn't waver. On what grounds? Price hesitated for only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Anthony saw it. Malik saw it. He had nothing, yet he continued anyway. For investigation purposes, he said. Anthony's voice lowered. That's not how the law works. Price moved closer again. Malik was about to speak when a car pulled abruptly into the lot. Tires scraped against gravel near the curb as the vehicle skidded lightly to a stop. Another police cruiser. Officer Wright stepped out. His posture stiffened instantly at the sight of the confrontation. "Price!" Wright called out sharply as he approached. "What are you doing?" Price didn't turn. "Handling a situation." "There is no situation," Wright insisted, approaching quickly. "Back off." Price didn't move. This man," Wright cut in firmly, "hasn't done anything wrong, and you're crossing a line, again." The tension hit a peak. Wright positioned himself between Price and Anthony, not aggressively, but with clear purpose. "You need to step back," Wright repeated. Price's nostrils flared. "You're undermining me." "You're putting the department at risk," Wright said, "and you're putting yourself at risk. Step back. Now." Price's fingers curled slightly near his vest. For a moment, Malik thought he might reach for something. Then Anthony spoke. "My son doesn't deserve this," he said quietly, more to Wright than Price. Wright nodded, his voice gentling as he addressed Anthony. "You're right, and I'm sorry you're dealing with it." Price snapped. "He's hiding something." "He's not hiding anything," Wright said. "You're manufacturing a case where none exists." The older officer's face twisted with something Malik didn't understand fully. Maybe humiliation, maybe frustration, maybe the crumbling of whatever narrative he had built. "Let it go, Price," Wright said firmly. "He made me look like a fool," Price said. "You don't get it." Wright's expression darkened. "That doesn't justify any of this." The two officers stared at each other, and for the first time Malik realized that Wright wasn't just another cop trying to smooth things over. He was someone who understood boundaries and saw clearly that they had been crossed. Price finally stepped back, though reluctantly. "This isn't over," he muttered. Anthony didn't react to the threat. Instead, he placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "Let's go." Wright nodded at Anthony. "I'll file a report about this. It won't be ignored." Price's eyes cut sharply toward Wright, but he didn't say anything else. He stood still, jaw tight, breathing heavily. Anthony guided Malik inside the dry cleaning shop, and only when the door closed behind them did Malik feel like he could draw a full breath again. His hands trembled slightly. He pressed them against his thighs to steady them. His father leaned down slightly. "You okay?" Malik nodded, though his voice was thin. "He looked like he wanted to." "I know," Anthony said, "but he didn't. And he won't." Malik wasn't convinced. "How do you know?" "Because he's being watched now," Anthony said. "And not just by me." They picked up the clothes, but the normalcy of the errand felt strange, like the world outside didn't match the intensity that had just taken place. Malik followed his father closely, unwilling to let more than a couple of steps separate them. When they walked back outside, Officer Wright stood alone beside his cruiser. Price was gone. Wright approached with a slower, quieter demeanor. "I want to make something clear," he said to Anthony. "What you've been dealing with is not standard. It's not how we operate. And it's not okay." Anthony nodded. "I appreciate your intervention." "You won't be dealing with this alone anymore," Wright added. "I've already contacted our supervisor. Price was warned after yesterday's incident. Today will escalate things further." Malik glanced at his father. Anthony's expression didn't shift visibly, but Malik sensed the tension under the surface. "Be cautious," Wright said. "Until this is handled, just be cautious." Anthony nodded once. They drove home in silence. When they pulled into the driveway, the house looked as it always did, quiet, simple, safe. But Malik no longer saw it the same way. It felt vulnerable now, like something precious exposed to the wrong kind of attention. Inside, Anthony locked the door and then set his keys down slowly. "Dad?" Malik said. "Yes?" "Why does he hate us so much?" Anthony sat down at the kitchen table and motioned for Malik to sit beside him. "He doesn't hate us," Anthony said. "He hates what he thinks we represent. He hates losing control. He hates being challenged. And he hates being wrong." "But that's not our fault." "I know," his father said gently. "But some people don't understand that their insecurities aren't the world's responsibility." Malik nodded slowly. The next few days passed without incident, but the silence felt tense, like the air just before a storm breaks. Malik tried to distract himself with practice, homework, and chores, but his thoughts kept circling back to the officer's eyes, to the look that felt less like anger and more like something creeping deeper. His father was on edge too, not visibly so. Anthony controlled his emotions with a discipline Malik respected deeply, but Malik saw the signs. His father checked the windows more often. He stepped onto the porch briefly every night, scanning the quiet street. He locked the doors twice before bed. Then one evening, something happened that shifted everything. It was late. Malik had just finished brushing his teeth when he heard a noise outside. Soft, subtle, but distinct enough to stand out. A metallic click like someone testing a latch. Malik froze. He listened harder. Another sound. A slow scrape. He hurried out of the bathroom. "Dad," he whispered. Before he could finish, Anthony stepped out of the hallway, already alert. He placed a finger to his lips. The house went silent. Another sound came from the back door. Anthony moved with quiet precision, signaling Malik to stay behind him. He checked the peephole of the front door, then motioned Malik toward the living room. "Stay low," he whispered. Malik crouched behind the couch, heart pounding so hard he felt the vibrations in his throat. Anthony moved toward the rear of the house. The soft glow from the kitchen window made his silhouette look sharper, more focused, like every muscle was prepared for something Malik couldn't see. A shadow appeared on the back doorstep, a faint outline of a person. Malik's breath stopped. Someone tried the handle. The door rattled. Anthony reached for something tucked in on a small lockbox near the wall, something Malik knew his father kept secure but rarely touched. A quiet voice outside murmured something Malik couldn't hear. Then a stronger tug. Malik's pulse quickened. He could feel fear rising in sharp waves. His father stood completely still, gaze fixed on the handle, listening. The figure outside moved again. A flashlight beam swept across the window. Malik's stomach dropped. It was a police-issued flashlight. Anthony's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, staying out of direct view of the window. Another voice spoke outside. This time, Malik caught part of it. "Back door's secure. Let's check the side." Plural. There were more than one. Malik swallowed hard. The figures moved around the house. Footsteps crunched over the gravel. Shadows crossed the side window briefly. Anthony returned to Malik and whispered, "Stay here. Don't move, no matter what." "Dad," Malik whispered back, his voice trembling. "I'll handle it," Anthony said softly. He moved toward the front door. A knock came just as he reached it. "Mr. Thompson," a voice called out. Not Price, another officer. "We need to speak with you." Anthony didn't open the door. State your purpose. We have questions regarding reports filed today, the officer said. What reports? Anthony asked. There was murmuring outside. Then another voice stepped forward. Price. Open the door, Thompson. We're not playing games. Anthony's posture stiffened, but he didn't open the door. You have no warrant, and no cause. We have reasonable suspicion, Price snapped. Of what? Anthony waited. Silence. Price didn't answer. Anthony spoke again, voice steady but louder. Leave my property. Malik could hear the officers shifting outside. They weren't expecting resistance. Or maybe they were, and that was part of the plan. Open the door, Price repeated. No. There was a pause. Then Price's voice hardened. Then we'll have to detain you for obstruction. Anthony's tone remained controlled. You cannot detain me without cause. You are outside of your authority, and you are trespassing. The officers murmured again, this time louder. Dad, Malik whispered from his hiding spot, fear clinging to his throat. Anthony moved back toward him briefly and crouched down. Listen to me, he said quietly, his hand resting on Malik's shoulder. You're safe. No matter what happens, you stay here. Understood? Malik nodded, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. Then something outside shifted. One of the officers tried the front door. The deadbolt held. Price's voice came sharp. Break it open. Anthony's eyes hardened. Dad! Malik whispered urgently. Anthony stood. He positioned himself several feet back from the door, bracing subtly. Outside, metal struck wood. A second slam. The frame groaned. Malik's breathing hitched. Then the door gave way with a violent crash. Splinters flew. The door swung inward. Officer Price stepped through first. He barely had time to register what happened next. Anthony moved. Not fast, not frantic, but with the precise, fluid control of someone who had trained for moments far more dangerous than this. He sidestepped Price's entry angle and used the officer's forward momentum against him, redirecting it with a swift motion that sent Price stumbling sideways into the wall. The other officers froze, startled. Anthony didn't strike. He didn't threaten. He simply positioned himself with a stance that protected Malik's line of sight while clearly signaling control. Stop! One of the officers shouted. But they did stop. Because what they saw wasn't aggression. It was training. High level, controlled, precise, and unmistakable. Price, at regaining his balance, stared at Anthony with shock and something close to fear. You, he stammered. You think you can… Leave, Anthony said, voice calm but carrying a command that felt larger than the room. The officers hesitated. Price grabbed for his taser. Anthony didn't move. Malik watched, breath frozen. Then a voice boomed from outside. Stand down! It wasn't right. It was deeper, older, authoritative. Another figure stepped into the doorway, a senior officer Malik had never seen before. His uniform bore higher rank. He took in the scene in one sweeping look. Then he turned to Price. What have you done? Price sputtered. Sir, he resisted. We had reports. Enough! The senior officer snapped. Step outside. All of you, now! The officers obeyed. Except Price. He stood frozen, shaking with anger and humiliation. Officer Price, the commanding officer said, this ends now. Step outside. Price's eyes darted to Anthony, then to Malik, half hidden but visibly terrified. Something broke inside Price's expression. Not guilt, something darker. He turned and strode outside. The senior officer apologized quietly to Anthony, then followed. Anthony immediately turned to Malik and crouched down. "Are you okay?" Malik nodded shakily. "Dad, he was going to—" "I know," Anthony said softly. "But he didn't. And he won't again. Not after this." But even as he spoke, Malik sensed the heavy truth beneath the words. Something had changed tonight. The line between intimidation and danger had been crossed, and whatever came next would not simply be about neighborhood tension or misunderstandings. It was bigger now. Greater forces were aware. More eyes were watching. And the fallout was only beginning. I will now write the full falling action of the story, between 4,000 and 5,000 words. The story will pick up exactly where the climax ended. The tone will shift into aftermath, consequences, emotional processing, and unresolved tensions that naturally lead into the resolution. The story will not end. The house was still vibrating with the echo of the broken door when the last cruiser pulled away, tires crackling against the gravel. Malik stood close to his father, feeling the way the air inside the home seemed different now, thicker, heavier, as though something unseen still lingered in the corners. Anthony rested one hand on Malik's back, grounding him with that familiar pressure. But Malik could feel the tremor beneath his father's calm. Not in Anthony's hands. They were steady as always. But in the air around him, a tension Malik had rarely seen and never this concentrated. The doorway stood open, splintered along the frame, wood fractured into jagged edges that caught the hallway light. Malik stared at the ruin, imagining the sound again. The slam, the crack of pressure, the moment the lock gave way. It echoed in his chest. Anthony finally exhaled. "Let's move away from the entrance," he said gently. "Come on." He ushered Malik to the living room, far from the damaged door. They sat close on the couch. Malik's breathing was still uneven, caught between shock and the fragile relief of being safe for the moment. "Dad," Malik's voice wavered. "He was going to take you." Anthony placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, and I'm sorry you had to see that." Malik shook his head. "You didn't do anything wrong." "That doesn't mean the situation wasn't dangerous," Anthony said. He looked toward the broken doorway, then back to Malik. "This wasn't supposed to happen." Malik studied him, noticing something he hadn't before. A trace of sorrow beneath his father's controlled exterior. Not fear, but a quiet ache, as if Anthony believed he had failed to shield Malik from something. "Dad," Malik whispered, "you protected me." Anthony's jaw tightened slightly, a faint sign of emotion he rarely let show. "I tried, but you shouldn't have been anywhere near something like that. Not in your own home." Malik didn't know what to say. He leaned against his father, who rested his arm around him, pulling him close. A moment passed before Anthony stood. "I need to check the rest of the house," he said softly. "Stay here. I'll be right back." Malik nodded, though he didn't want to be alone even for a second. The quiet after the chaos felt too hollow, too uncertain. Anthony moved through the house methodically, examining the windows, back door, and the hallway. Malik listened to each footstep like a marker of safety. When his father returned, he gave a small nod. "Everything else is secure, but we're not sleeping here tonight." Malik's brow furrowed. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," Anthony said. "Somewhere they won't look." That answer raised more questions, But Malik didn't push. He trusted his father in ways that went deeper than understanding. Anthony grabbed his phone and made another call. Long, hushed, filled with clipped responses Malik couldn't decipher. When he hung up, he turned back to his son. "Pack some essentials," he said. "Just what you need." Malik nodded and hurried to his room. He grabbed a backpack and stuffed in a change of clothes, his toothbrush, the small photo of him and his dad at the park, and his basketball, a comfort more than a necessity. He lingered with the ball in his hands. Everything felt fragile now, as though the simple things of his life could crack like the doorframe. Anthony appeared in the doorway. "Got everything?" Malik nodded. His father placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Good. Let's go." They stepped out into the night air. The broken door made the house look wounded. Malik felt a pull in his chest, like leaving behind something familiar, but not safe. Anthony walked him to the car, placed their bags in the back seat, and locked the doors. Malik noticed how his father scanned the street before getting in, how he lingered an extra moment before starting the engine. "Buckle up," Anthony said. They drove through the quiet neighborhood. The houses around them looked peaceful, porches lit, curtains drawn, familiar silhouettes behind windows. Yet Malik felt disconnected from all of it, as though the entire neighborhood had shifted into a different shape. "Dad," Malik said after a minute of silence. "Where are we going?" "To a friend's place," Anthony replied. "A secure location." Malik didn't recognize the term, but he didn't ask further. He watched the road ahead, noticing how his father took unfamiliar routes, avoiding main roads and looping through side streets. Anthony checked the rearview mirror often, not nervously, but deliberately, as though following a protocol. They eventually reached a townhouse complex on the other side of the city. Anthony pulled into a narrow driveway and turned off the engine. The windows glowed softly with warm light. The place looked ordinary, almost comfortingly so. "We're here," Anthony said. Malik stepped out, adjusting his backpack. The evening breeze felt cooler here, carrying a quiet stillness separate from the fear they'd left behind. Anthony knocked once, a specific rhythm, sharp, then soft, then sharp again. The door opened. A woman stood there. She was tall, with alert eyes and a calm expression. Malik had seen her once before, years ago, though he couldn't place where. "Come in," she said to Anthony, stepping aside. "Thanks for doing this," Anthony said. She nodded. "Given the circumstances, it wasn't a request I was going to refuse." Malik followed them inside. The house smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. A dog bed sat in the corner, though no dog was present. The woman gestured toward the living room. "Sit, both of you," she said. Anthony placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. They sat on the couch while the woman closed the blinds, then returned and leaned against the armchair. "You and your son are safe here," she said. "No one will find this address." Malik looked up at his father. Anthony's expression softened slightly, though tension still lived beneath the surface. "Thank you," Anthony said. "Tell me everything," the woman said. And so he did. Anthony recounted the events from the community center to the confrontation at the house. Malik listened quietly, watching the woman's expression shift from concern to disbelief to quiet anger. "This officer," she said. "Price. You said he attempted to break into your home without a warrant?" "Yes," Anthony confirmed. "He led multiple officers." The woman took a slow breath. His actions violate protocol on several levels, not to mention the legal ramifications. She turned to Malik. And you witnessed all of it? Malik nodded. He kept following us. And he came to my school. Her jaw tightened. That crosses so many lines I'm struggling to count them. Anthony leaned forward slightly. What's the next step? She regarded him carefully. Officially, there will be an internal investigation. Unofficially, that won't be enough. At least not fast enough to ensure your safety. Malik's chest tightened. Are we in danger? The woman knelt down beside Malik, speaking gently. You are not the problem, sweetheart. But someone who should have known better let his pride turn into something reckless. That can make people unpredictable. Malik swallowed hard. So what do we do? We protect you, she said simply. Anthony watched his son, his eyes soft with something Malik recognized. The deep, protective love he'd felt all his life. The woman turned back to Anthony. I've already notified a federal contact about the situation. Once they review your file and what happened tonight, they'll intervene. Intervene how? Anthony asked. She hesitated for a moment. Depends on what they determine. But given your clearance and the circumstances, they won't ignore this. Anthony nodded. Good. Because ignoring it is what allowed it to escalate. For a moment, the room was quiet. Malik leaned into his father's side, and Anthony gently rested an arm around him. Then the woman stood. You two need to eat. I'll make something simple. Malik didn't even realize how hungry he was until she said it. Adrenaline had pushed hunger aside, but now his stomach felt hollow. While she cooked, Anthony checked the locks again, then paced slowly through the living room, scanning the space the way he always did, quietly, efficiently. Malik watched him from the couch, recognizing the heaviness in his father's steps. Dad, Malik said softly. Anthony turned. Yes? Do you think they'll punish him? Anthony exhaled slowly. There will be consequences. Will it stop him? Malik asked. It has to, Anthony said quietly. But Malik heard the uncertainty beneath the words. Not doubt in the system, his father was too controlled for that, but doubt in the behavior of someone who had already shown he didn't follow the rules. Later that night, after they ate and the woman prepared the guest room, Anthony sat with Malik on the edge of the bed. I'm sorry, Anthony said. Malik looked up. For what? For you having to see me in a situation like that. Malik frowned. You didn't do anything wrong. You never do. Even so, Anthony said, you shouldn't have to worry about me being taken from you. The fear Malik had been trying to suppress washed over him again. I thought when they broke the door, his voice broke. Anthony pulled him close. I know, he whispered, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Malik held on to him tightly. That night, Malik struggled to sleep. His thoughts spun between fear and confusion, replaying the events in loops. He lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioner and the occasional soft sound of his father walking between the window and the door. At some point, exhaustion pulled Malik under. But the dreams that came were fragmented, flashes of police lights, of the splintered doorway, of the officer's eyes. When morning arrived, the world felt different again. Anthony was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Malik shuffled in, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," his father said softly. "Morning," Malik replied. The woman entered from the hallway, holding her phone. "The agency responded," she said, looking directly at Anthony. Anthony straightened. "What did they say?" "They want to meet. Today. Non-negotiable." Malik felt a shiver of something. Not fear, not exactly, but anticipation mixed with uncertainty. "Where?" Anthony asked. "Secure location," she replied. "They'll send transport." Malik looked between them. "Are we going too?" Anthony nodded. "Yes, we're doing this together." 2 hours later, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. A man in a plain suit stepped out and approached the front porch. Anthony greeted him calmly. "Mr. Thompson," the man said, "we're here to escort you and your son." Malik studied him, sensing something different about this person, not threatening, but precise in posture and tone. They got into the SUV and drove across the city. The windows were tinted, making the outside world blur into shapes and colors. Malik stared at the passing buildings, feeling how far they'd traveled, not just physically, but in every way. The vehicle eventually reached a low, unmarked building at the edge of an industrial district. They were led inside through a side entrance and guided down a hallway to a private room. Inside waited 3 individuals, 2 in suits, 1 in uniform Malik didn't recognize. They stood when Anthony entered. "Mr. Thompson," one of the suited individuals said, "please have a seat." Anthony sat with controlled confidence. Malik sat beside him. The man in the uniform opened a folder. "We reviewed the incident and your service record." He slid a document across the table. "What happened last night should never have occurred." Anthony didn't speak. "We will be initiating immediate action," the man continued, "against Officer Price and anyone who supported his conduct." Malik's shoulders loosened for the first time in hours. "However," the second suited individual said, "there is something else you need to be aware of." Anthony looked toward him. "This situation has escalated outside local jurisdiction, and given your security clearance, your presence in the area is being reassessed." Malik blinked. "Reassessed?" Anthony's expression darkened slightly. "Meaning what?" The man folded his hands. "Meaning you and your son may need to relocate, temporarily, for safety and confidentiality." Malik felt like the floor shifted beneath him. "Relocate," he whispered. Anthony turned quickly toward him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Temporary," he reassured softly. The official continued, "We will provide the location, security, and support. You will not be alone." Malik swallowed hard. "But our home—" "Your safety comes first," the uniformed man said. Anthony nodded slowly. "How long will this last?" "Until the investigation is complete," the official replied, "and until all risks are eliminated." Malik felt tension rise again. Moving away, even temporarily, felt huge. When they exited the meeting room, Malik clung to his father's side. Outside, the woman from the townhouse waited. She approached them with a soft smile. "I heard," she said. Malik looked up at her. "We have to move?" She crouched to meet his eyes. "Only for a little while. Think of it as a safe break." "But what about my school? My friends?" Malik whispered. Anthony knelt in front of Malik. His expression was steady, but Malik could see the emotion beneath it. Pain at asking so much of his child. "Listen to me," Anthony said. "Wherever we go together. You're not losing anything. This is just something we have to get through." Malik's eyes stung. "Why does this have to happen to us?" Anthony pulled him into a tight embrace. "Because someone made choices he shouldn't have. Not you, not me. But we'll get through this. I promise." Malik held on to him, gripping the fabric of his father's shirt as though anchoring himself. When they finally left the building, the sky overhead was beginning to shift, clouds gathering slowly, blocking patches of sun. The air felt cooler, heavier, as though reflecting the weight of the day. They got back into the SUV. Malik slid across the seat and leaned against his father. Anthony wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close in quiet reassurance. The woman sat in the front, speaking softly to the driver. Malik couldn't hear the words, but he understood the tone. Finalizing plans, confirming arrangements. As the vehicle pulled away from the building, Malik looked out the window. The city blurred past, familiar and distant at the same time. He didn't know where they were going next. He only knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, it wasn't over. There were things still unresolved, questions still hanging in the air, and consequences that hadn't yet unfolded. His father felt it too. Anthony's hand rested gently on Malik's shoulder, and the road ahead stretched forward, long and uncertain, carrying them toward the next part of their fight for truth and safety. I will now write the full 2,000-word resolution section. This will end and conclude the story clearly, with no cliffhangers, following the established tone and narrative. The ride to the temporary safe location took nearly an hour, though to Malik it felt suspended outside of time. He watched the city thin out, buildings giving way to stretches of quiet neighborhoods, then eventually to the outskirts where open land sat between clusters of trees. The road curved gently, the SUV humming steadily along, its tinted windows turning the scenery into muted colors. Malik leaned against his father, drawing comfort from the familiar steadiness of his presence. When the vehicle finally slowed, they approached a large, modest house set behind a tall fence. It wasn't extravagant or intimidating, just sturdy and intentionally secluded, the type of place designed for privacy, not show. The woman from the townhouse stepped out first, spoke to someone near the entrance, then gestured for them to follow. Anthony opened the door and placed a gentle hand on Malik's back. "Let's go," he said softly. Inside, the air felt different, cooler, quieter, almost insulated from everything beyond the walls. The living room was furnished simply, with soft lighting and thick curtains that blocked sight from the outside. Malik heard the lock click behind them, not loudly, but with a certainty that made him feel protected. A man wearing a plain polo shirt approached. He didn't look like any officer Malik had seen before. No badge, no stern posture. Yet something about the way he held himself felt official, intentional, strong. "Mr. Thompson," the man said as he extended a hand. "I'm Jacob. I'll be overseeing your stay here." Anthony shook his hand. "Thank you." "Your rooms are prepared," Jacob continued. "There's food in the kitchen, and the property is monitored 24 hours a day. You won't have to worry about anyone showing up unannounced." He paused, glancing at Malik. "You're safe here." Malik nodded quietly. They followed Jacob down the hall. The room Malik would use was simple but warm, with a bed, a small desk, and a window overlooking a cluster of tall trees. He placed his backpack gently at the foot of the bed. After Jacob left, Malik sat down, his feet dangling above the floor. Anthony stood beside him, studying his face. "You holding up?" Anthony asked. Malik drew a slow breath. "A little." His father sat beside him. The mattress dipped slightly under his weight. "You did everything right," Anthony said. "All of this happened because someone else didn't. But you did everything right." Malik leaned against him. "I don't understand why he was so angry. Why it got so bad." Anthony rested a hand on the back of his son's head, steady and warm. "Some people look at others and see what they fear, not what's real. Some people make assumptions and hold on to them too tight. And sometimes they let pride twist into something harmful." He paused. "But his choices aren't your burden to carry, and they never will be." Malik closed his eyes for a moment, letting his father's words sink in. That night, sleep came easier than the night before. The house felt protected, and the quiet held no threat. Malik drifted off to the faint hum of the ventilation system and the steady reassurance of his father moving quietly through the hall. The next morning, sunlight filtered in through the curtains. Malik woke to the sound of soft voices, his father speaking with Jacob near the front room. Malik sat up, rubbed his eyes, and walked out to join them. Anthony looked over and offered a small smile. "Morning." "Morning," Malik replied. Jacob nodded to him. "We received updates," he said to Anthony. "The internal investigation moved faster than expected. Price has been suspended, effective immediately." Malik felt something ease inside him, like a knot loosening. "And the others?" Anthony asked. "Two officers who accompanied him last night admitted their involvement was based on his orders," Jacob said. "They're cooperating fully. They're facing disciplinary action, but none of them acted independently." Anthony nodded slowly. "What about us?" Malik asked quietly. Jacob smiled gently. "You'll be able to go home soon. The investigation team wants to make sure there are no remaining risks, but it's looking good." Malik exhaled, shoulders lowering. "So, we get to go back?" "Not today," Jacob said, "but soon." Malik felt Anthony's hand settle on his shoulder. The warmth of it made everything feel more real. For the rest of the day, they stayed inside the safe house. Malik played a small game on his phone, read a book someone had left on the shelf, and sat near the window watching the trees sway with the breeze. Anthony took several phone calls, all brief, all spoken in a quiet tone that made Malik think the conversations were part of some larger process he didn't need to understand. They ate dinner together at the small dining table, simple food, but the warmth of it helped ease the lingering tension. Malik laughed once or twice, though softly, unsure if it was okay to feel something light again. His father noticed and smiled back, as if encouraging him. That night, Malik asked a question he had been carrying since the moment the door broke open. "Dad, when you moved like that, when you stopped him, is that what you do in your job?" Anthony thought for a moment. "Sometimes," he said, "but it's never something I want you to see. My work is meant to be separate from our life at home." Malik nodded. "You were protecting me." Anthony met his eyes. "Always." The next morning, Jacob entered the kitchen while Malik and Anthony were finishing breakfast. "It's time," Jacob said. Anthony set down his fork. "We're cleared?" Jacob nodded. The investigation findings were processed around midnight. Officer Price has been relieved of duty indefinitely. He will not be returning to the field, and a restraining order has been put in place, effective immediately. Malik felt something shift deep in his chest, relief washing through him, slow but certain. So, he can't come near us? No, Jacob said firmly. Not physically, not professionally, not in any capacity. Anthony exhaled, a long breath that seemed to release tension Malik hadn't even realized his father was carrying. When can we go home? Malik asked. This afternoon, Jacob said. We'll escort you, just to ensure everything is in order. It took only a few hours to pack. Malik zipped his backpack closed, glancing around the small room one last time. It had been safe, protected. But it wasn't home. The drive back felt different from before, calmer, brighter. Jacob led the convoy with 2 vehicles following behind. As they pulled onto their street, Malik leaned forward, peering through the window. Their house stood quietly under the afternoon sun. The broken door had been replaced, new wood, freshly installed, the frame reinforced. Someone had tended to the front yard as well, trimming the grass and sweeping the walkway. When the SUV stopped, Malik stepped out slowly. The air smelled familiar, like warm pavement and the faint scent of the neighbor's jasmine bushes. Anthony placed a steady hand on his back. Go ahead, he said. You're home. Malik walked toward the front steps, his heart pounding for reasons different from fear. He reached the new door and touched the smooth wood. The house felt the same and different all at once, like something wounded had been mended. Jacob joined them at the porch. Everything inside is the same as you left it, he said. Your neighbor checked on it earlier. He said he'd be by later to welcome you home. Anthony nodded gratefully. Thank you. For everything. Jacob gave a small smile. This is what we do, and you two will be okay. Malik looked up at him. Do we have to be scared now? No, Jacob said. You're safe. Anthony unlocked the door and stepped inside first. Malik followed. The living room looked untouched, though Malik's gaze lingered on the door where the door had been broken. The memory flashed briefly, but only briefly. It no longer held the same sharpness. Anthony placed a hand on Malik's shoulder and gently squeezed. We go forward now, he said, not backward. Malik nodded. That evening, father and son sat on the porch as the sun began to set. The sky shimmered in soft shades of rose and gold. Malik held his basketball on his lap, turning it slowly. Dad? Malik said softly. Yes? I'm still scared sometimes. Anthony exhaled slowly, the sound warm and calming. That's normal. Fear isn't a weakness. It's something we work through. He looked down at Malik. But I want you to remember something important. Malik leaned closer, listening. You told the truth, Anthony said, and the truth stood, no matter how many times someone tried to twist it. Malik swallowed. And you protected me. Anthony smiled gently. Of course I did. I always will. But today proved something else, too. What? Malik asked. You're stronger than you think, Anthony said. You kept your head. You trusted your instincts. You trusted me. That matters. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead. A soft quiet surrounded them, not tense, not fearful, but peaceful. Malik rested his head against his father's arm. Are things normal now? Anthony wrapped an arm around him. Maybe not normal, but safe. And safe is enough to start again. Malik nodded. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the last light fade. Malik felt the warmth of his father beside him, steady and certain. The memory of the officers' laughter, the chaos at their home, the fear. They were becoming smaller things, not gone but softened by the truth that had risen above them. When the first stars appeared in the sky, Anthony stood and held out a hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's go inside." Malik took it. Together they stepped back into their home. And for the first time in days, Malik felt the quiet settle in the way it used to. Not heavy, not threatening, but familiar. Safe. Home. And the story of what had happened, of fear, of pride, of truth, of protection, would become something they carried forward together, not as a wound, but as a reminder of who they were. Father and son. Together. And safe.